There is an idea of the United Kingdom, and this idea has recently, apparently, clashed with rioters in the streets of London. It is in the face of this apparent collapse of society that many in Britain are looking back to a so-called golden age of Britain, during the Second World War, when people came together despite insurmountable odds in Europe. This was a time, after all, when the home was the focus of family. People would sit around and talk to one another, or listen to their favourite radio shows on the wireless. People look back to this time when society was far more coherent, when there was a keep calm and carry on spirit that permeated every man, woman and child, and we looked after each other during the relentless raids on London. This was a time when women were strong and men were men, and people look back to this time with a great sense of sentimentality, yearning for yesteryear. However, the truth was a little more prosaic. There were just as many people out looting during bombing raids as there were people trying to put out the fires. After all, our stereotypical image of a burglar comes from this time. In the communal shelters, people would occasionally find their pockets picked, or even be attacked in their sleep. When there wasn't a bombing raid, shopkeepers would strive to make a profit through black market deals and overpriced goods, and many children were left abandoned on the streets of London. But this is not the truth which people cling to. Instead, they have a very clear idea of the past and what they should live up to. Ancestor worship is one of the earliest forms of veneration which we see in the archaeological record. In the Neolithic, great tombs were constructed which housed not the bones of individuals, but rather individual bones from many, many people. This was the ancestors given form and shape. Artists, warriors and orators of ancient Greece laboured under the impression that there had been a golden age prior to their own. During this time, the epics of the Iliad and Homer's poems had played out with real people, and they could never hope to better the achievements of these great ancestors. Rather, they could only ever hope to emulate the great heroes of Troy, or the potters and the writers which had come before them. Great figures from history, such as Julius Caesar, are now remembered for their achievements. However, they too laboured under the weight of their ancestors. As a young man, Julius Caesar visited the grave of Alexander the Great and wept, for he thought he would never achieve such heights of magnificence as Alexander had. Thousands of years later, the Frankish king Charlemagne yearned to emulate the emperors of Rome, and eventually was given the title Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope. Charlemagne's deeds were barbaric by any standards, but eventually became romanticized, and in turn he became the epitome of knighthood. During the Crusades, people strove to be like him, and so on and so forth down through the ages. It seems that the human condition is to always suspect that somehow the modern day is never quite good enough. We compare ourselves to the giants which we perceive in the past, and accuse ourselves of not living up to their great legacy. And in many cases, the giant becomes so big that it is difficult to see our way forward. However, archaeology tells us that in the future, people will look back to us and romanticize and imagine that somehow we existed in a cultural golden age. So certainly, look back and sup champagne to the memories of our ancestors. But remember that archaeology tells us to be kind to ourselves, for we are no better or worse than those who have come before us. If we gaze fairly upon yesterday, then we are at liberty to create a better tomorrow.